On Biotechnology and Nanotechnology 2016. The chairperson for the session is Dr. Krishnan Mohan. Dr. Krishnan Mohan has a master's and doctoral degree in microbiology from G.B. Pant University of Agriculture and Technology, Pantnagar. He has been associated with the Microbial Biotechnology Group at Tata Energy Research Institute. He was an active member of the much-acclaimed TERI project on Green India 2047. He has also worked as a consultant to the public as well as private sector organizations for the solid waste management programs. Presently, Dr. Mohan is involved in assessing microbial biodiversity of salt lakes and deserts and still keeps his interests alive on lignin biodegradation. We welcome you, sir. May I now request Professor Pradeep Bhatnagar, Dean, Faculty of Science, the IIS University, to present a token of our gratitude.
The first speaker for this session is Professor A.P. Gupta, and I believe very few people require any introduction to him, and he is from MNIT, and he is a civil engineer, but I am a microbiologist, but he knows more microbiology than me. And Professor Gupta would be speaking today on nitrate toxicity and biological nitrogen removal in new dimension.
He's been an old friend. Both of us are old enough, of course. And I've been in a academic council of your institute for quite some time, so there is no point introducing. There's nothing worth introducing, so there is no point introducing me. And as Dr. Mohan said, I teach in civil engineering department, but I'm a student of environmental sciences. Till the point you remain students, you can do something. And I still try to do something. Whether I can or not is a question which it's better we do not try to be judgmental about. So this is not really one of my recent researches. It's pretty old. Way back in 1987, I started working on nitrate toxicity and then on nitrogen removal from sewage. And till about 1999, I continued with some of these works. But I took this particular topic because that is one of the pieces of biotechnology that I've tried over the years. And I'm trying to revive it for natural systems these days. And I have registered one of the PhD candidates. So I just leave certain extensions at the end of this presentation. And it's more for the young students because, you see, we are useless without our students. We work we are able to work because of our students only. So our very existence depends on our students. So all this work is dedicated to all my students over 31 years of my teaching. And many of them are faculty members at IHE Delft, Netherlands, and University of Kent in Australia, Oxford University, and University of Manchester. There's a huge list. So I'm indebted to all of them. First of all, the very question as to why should we remove nitrogen is very important to understand, because why do you do any research? Ultimately, it has to have some aim and some application for the society. Nitrogen in any form tends to trigger eutrophication in the receiving water bodies, whether it's a lake or a river, whatever. And in any form, be it nitrate or nitrite or ammoniacal nitrogen, you can see the change in valency of nitrogen in these compounds. And all of these are highly assimilable and they have a high algal growth potential. So that results into excessive algal blooms in the lakes and simultaneously a lot of algal toxins. Ammoniacal nitrogen exhibits toxicity towards aquatic life. And I remember 1988, Powai Lake, IIT Bombay, some industry unauthorizedly discharged a lot of highly alkaline waste. This lake already was receiving a lot of sewage. So there was a presence of ammonium in the water, But because of high pH, the equilibrium shifted to free ammonia, ammonium to ammonia. And free ammonia is highly toxic to fish. And thousands of fish died overnight. And people were just, making some light remarks because some of these fish were having a weight of 40 kg and I had the same weight that time. So they were just smiling that good that you were not swimming in the lake. But thousands of fish died overnight, all because one industry unauthorizedly disposed of its wastewater into a lake that already was receiving sewage from various places, and hence it's not ammonium which is toxic, it's free ammonia that is toxic, and that will come at high pH. So that is why you have to remove ammonium nitrogen. It depletes dissolved oxygen because ammonium can get oxidized to nitrite and nitrate, so it has oxygen demand. So naturally it will derive it from its environment, that is whatever is the receiving water body. And if dissolved oxygen gets depleted, again it's a dangerous situation. Way back in 1995 we were working on Talkatora restoration, and people from Nagar Nigam came to me and said, "Sir, the water quality of lake is alright. We try to put thousands of fish, but they are consumed overnight by 50 odd tortoises that live in this lake." I said, don't blame those poor tortoises. 250 meter by 250 meter lake or a pond with thousands of fish being put, you cannot expect them physically to go over and consume every fish. So I started monitoring its water quality, asked the students to work day and night, and during the night time they found that dissolved oxygen levels were typically reaching 2 ppm. Anything below 4 ppm, fish almost die instantly. So any depletion in DO is dangerous, any toxicity due to ammonia is dangerous, and if it is in an oxidized form, that is nitrates, nitrate is toxic to human beings, and we have a lot of work on nitrate toxicity, but I'll just try to summarize it on one slide itself, and thereafter I'll talk about nitrogen removal. The WHO permits 45 milligram per liter of nitrate in drinking water. Indian standards also permit 45, though permissible up to 100 in the absence of any alternate source. And as per the literature, it leads to nitrate toxicity may lead to methemoglobinemia, which is also called infantile methemoglobinemia or blue baby's disease. What happens is, up to 7 months of age, if the child ingests high nitrates, nitrates per se are not toxic. If they get reduced to nitrites somehow for some reason within the body, then nitrite joins with hemoglobin to form methemoglobin. And methemoglobin has about 50 times lesser capacity to carry oxygen. So the main function of hemoglobin is not fulfilled. If the body wants some oxygen, for want of oxygen, the first symptoms that would come would be turning of the skin blue. And in a severe form, the child may die of asphyxia. The goodness is death. So this is what is reported. And in Rajasthan, as against the standards of 45 ppm, I have worked in many areas and have tested water samples, drinking water samples containing up to 2500 ppm of nitrates. And people have reported in Churu up to 5100 ppm of nitrates in groundwaters. And in Jaipur itself, anything between 25 ppm to 1000 ppm was commonly prevalent those days when I started off my works. I was making a presentation in 1987. My examiner was the then Principal Medical College, Professor Rameshwar Sharma. I have presented 2 reasons for possibly not detecting any cases of methemoglobinemia in Rajasthan, despite high nitrates being prevalent. I said, either we have developed a particular enzyme, cytochrome B5 reductase, due to adaptation, because for centuries Rajasthan has high nitrate in groundwater, So we may have developed this enzyme which converts nitrate back to nitrate, thereby preventing toxicity. Or we are not reporting the cases properly. We are not able to diagnose it. He laughed at me, and he was a great person. I mean, I have highest regards for Dr. Rameshwar Sharma. So he said, such things are not reported anywhere. So I said, but there is always a first time for any report. So he said, what is the reason for this confidence? I did a small thing. First thing I said was, he said, enzymatic adaptations in human beings are not common. I said, alcohol dehydrogenases are very common adaptations. Europeans, Western world people, you don't find losing controls in 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or 5 pags. But typically the Brahmins and Baniyas in India, there was a taboo. No absolute for alcohol. तो कहते हैं ना सूंघर चढ़ जाती है. This is very common. You find with 1 peg people losing control. That is a very common example of human alcohol dehydrogenases adaptation. So I said, why should it not be a possibility? And then I did a small thing. Those days there were no LCDs. We used to use overhead projectors. So on a map of Rajasthan, I put a map of Rajasthan on a transparent sheet and put nitrate contours from data derived from PHEDs and groundwater boards. On another sheet, on the same scale, I put up in-pen mortality data. And when I superimposed the two, wherever 750 milligram per liter nitrate contour existed, in-pen mortality was very, very high and much higher than that of other places. So I said, we cannot deny this correlation. He stood up and said, बेटा मेरा आशीर्वाद है, तुम रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट लेके काम करो, तुम्हें सक्सेस मिलेगी. Your explanation for the hypothesis is amazing, and I believe that you take up funding from ICMR and start working. 1995 we received our first funding. We started working in Paladi and adjoining 6 villages of Viratnagar area, Jaipur-Alwar border. This village Paladi had more than 40% of the married ladies who had lost 1 or more children within the first year of its birth. And there was a joint family of about 50-55 persons that was losing on an average 1 child every year. We stayed back, took water samples, blood samples, carried out our study, and to cut short, we found a very strange thing, that family was losing 1 child a year because of its relative richness in the village. They had their own fields, they were using fertilizer subsidy to its maximum, putting excessive fertilizers. They had their own well near the same premises. Their well water had 1100 ppm of nitrate as against 45. They had a lot of buffaloes. They used to mix some water with the milk before giving it to the child. And we proved for the first time about nitrate pathophysiology. How can it result into stomatitis, chhalevana, recurrent respiratory tract infections? I will not talk about, but just another couple of minutes. Till date, it was always said in the literature that methemoglobinemia occurs under diarrheal conditions. Why? Because nitrate reducing organisms are all there in the stomach, but stomach pH content is very, very low. pH is very low. So the enzyme nitrate reductase is unable to express. But during diarrhea you give a lot of water. That tends to bring pH up. And then the enzyme expresses, nitrate reduces to nitrite, and then it goes into the methemoglobinemia cycle. I said, if we can prove that chemical diarrhea is a possibility, we'll be having explanation for all those deaths. And then we try to put forth the pathophysiology, and it was published in a very high-end journal, where we initiated that how can 425 plus milligram per liter of nitrates initiate diarrhea. Now imagine a situation. With milk, you are putting 1100 ppm of nitrate containing water. The diarrhea starts, which is a chemical diarrhea, not a bacterial infection or amoebic or viral infection. Then in diarrhea you are giving ORS, which is now the same local water of 1100 ppm of nitrate, that too in excessive amounts. The child dies of methemoglobinemia and it is misdiagnosed as a diarrheal death. So we took certain interventions that up to 1 year the child has to be kept on mother's milk. If you are giving external milk, give pure milk. And if the child suffers from diarrhea due to any reason, maybe any infection or whatever, buy a bottle of water to prepare ORS. That family has not lost a single child since 1995, and that village has recorded an infant mortality rate of less than a third after a infection. So this is how you have to apply your fundamentals for field applications. Now, different forms of nitrogen that are present in water are ammonical nitrogen, organic nitrogen. These two put together are called Zeldal nitrogen, and then nitrites, nitrate. So the total nitrogen is TKN plus nitrite plus nitrate. And see, it's very difficult for removing nitrates from dilute aqueous solutions because it's highly non-reactive. So the only way to remove nitrates from drinking water is maybe RO or ED processes, electrodialysis or reverse osmosis processes, which cannot be used at a community level. It's just not possible to supply RO water to the whole community. So the better thing would be to prevent. Where is it coming from? Primarily sewage, which contains lots of organic nitrogen, and some agricultural runoffs because of excessive fertilizer being used. So what happens is, a lot of organic nitrogen is there in the sewage, which converts to ammonical nitrogen due to hydrolytic actions during the travel of the sewage in the sewer line. Once it reaches the treatment plant, most of the nitrogen is available in the form of ammoniacal nitrogen. That can be oxidized to nitrite and nitrate in sequence by Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter genera. These are chemoautotrophs. That means they require carbon dioxide as a carbon source, and they derive their energy from oxidation of ammonia to nitrite and nitrite to nitrate. Chemoautotrophs always grow much slower than heterotrophs, and sewage has a lot of organics. So heterotrophs dominate till the organics are there. So we'll see how we have to go for a two-stage process if we want to achieve nitrification. But organics have to be removed prior to nitrification. Now nitrate is reduced to nitrogen gas in a series of steps: nitrate to nitrite, then nitric oxide, nitrous oxide, and finally nitrogen gas when it goes out from the sewage. And that requires organic carbon as a donor. So it's a heterotrophic process. Organic carbon you have already removed in the prior step. So essentially what happens is that biological conversion of ammonia is a two-step process. Ammonia to nitrate. First is through nitrosomonas that convert ammonia to ammonia or ammonium to nitrite. And they require a lot of oxygen. So it's an aerobic process. A lot of alkalinity is destroyed in the process. In the second step, Nitrobacter convert nitrite to nitrate. So it's also an aerobic process. So both these processes are aerobic and chemoautotrophic. So you require organics to be removed as a prior step. So what happens? Since they are strict aerobes, they require at least a minimum of 2 ppm of DO. Nitrification requires much longer retention time than what is required for organics removal. And another thing is, about 4.6 units of oxygen are required per unit of ammonia oxidized, and 7.14 units of alkalinity are destroyed per unit of ammonia oxidized to nitrite. So all these things result into a lot of cost to be added if you want to improve upon an organic removal system to nitrification. So there are both kinds of systems. In the same reactor, instead of say about 4 to 8 hours of detention, you keep it for 1 to 2 days detention. That means you increase the detention time by 6 to 8 times. That means a huge reactor to be aerated, huge operating cost. Or, so in a combined system, organics, oxidation and nitrification are combined, and you have a clarifier with the return biomass. In a separate system, since heterotrophs and autotrophs have virtually no competition, so in the initial step we remove carbon and we separately remove nitrogen, and here virtually there is no sludge wasted because growth rate in nitrification is very low. Practically all the sludge is sent back, all the biomass is sent back. And this is effective when BOD to pKn ratio is more than 5. And hence a lot of cost involved with nitrification. But nitrogen has changed its form from ammonium to nitrate. It has not been removed. It has to be further removed by a process of denitrification. Now what are the requirements for denitrification? Nitrification is aerobic. This is anoxic because nitrate has to accept the electron. And oxygen is the most preferred electron acceptor. So if oxygen is present, oxygen will receive the electron, not nitrate. So what you require is anoxic conditions. And then these are heterotrophs predominantly. So you require organic carbon source which you have already removed as a prior step to nitrification. So now you have to add organic carbon source and you have to put anoxic conditions in the reactor for removing nitrate in a series of steps to nitrogen gas. So mostly these are anaerobic heterotrophs with the reaction being shown here, and you require carbon source, and there are various methods tried where you could use the raw organics being present to some extent by creating partial nitrification in one step and then denitrification receiving some organics from the raw sewage itself in order to reduce the cost. Otherwise, if you put methanol, which is the cheapest available organic carbon source, it's extremely costly. And a small industry like Rashtriya Chemical Fertilizers, Mumbai, was incurring 27 lakh rupees a month of expenditure on methanol as a carbon source in their denitrification reactor. So it's a huge cost. So people have tried many combinations of simultaneous nitrification, denitrification by partly transferring the raw sewage into denitrification unit. But it is very difficult because you have to have anoxic and aerobic stretches in sequence, and it is very difficult for the biomass to get acclimated to such environment. So process efficiencies are low. And another thing in the denitrification is about half the alkalinity of what was destroyed in nitrification is generated in denitrification. So there are pH fluctuations in both the reactors. So many things have been tried by people for carbon source, like acetate, propionate, butyrate, lactate, but ultimately methanol proves to be the cheapest. But still it has a lot of cost involved, and hence, carrying out nitrification, denitrification means typically about 70 to 90% extra cost to be incurred to an existing sewage treatment plant which was designed for secondary treatment by this organics removal. There are some reports on autotrophic denitrification also, where certain sulfur bacteria tend to utilize sulfur as an energy source and remove nitrate. So advantage is that you don't need any external organic carbon source, but nevertheless you need sulfur as the energy source, which is also costly. So there are various bacteria based on sulfur, like on thiosulfate or sulfide as the substrate, and there are some hydrogen-based autotrophic denitrifications also reported, but at relatively much lower values than the heterotrophic denitrification. So I saw a paper by Robertson and Quinnen from TU Delft, Netherlands in 1988. It was in AEM, Applied and Environmental Microbiology. And I found its enzyme system to be very, very interesting. First of all, it was capable of heterotrophic nitrification. Till now, I told that nitrification is predominantly autotrophic. And it was capable of denitrifying even at saturation oxygen levels. Though at a low rate, but even at very high DO levels, it was able to denitrify. And this was the typical flow of equations suggested for its nitrification, denitrification combined. What I noticed in this system was, this bacterium was, that its specific nitrifying activity was 10 to 1000 times slower than that of autotrophs. So I took it to my supervisor at IIT Bombay. I said, this is a wonderful organism and it has a very high rate of heterotrophic nitrification. He said 10 to 1000 times lower K value and you are saying it's a high value. I said yes, because routinely the heterotrophic nitrification used to have 1000 to 10,000 times lesser K value than that of autotrophic nitrifiers. So it's a relatively much higher value. And why I am saying that it is very important? He said still it will be insignificant. I said no, it's mu max, or the growth rate constant is almost 25 times higher than that of Nitrosomonas. What does it mean? It will be able to grow competitively in a mixed culture as a heterotroph and may dominate Nitrosomonas, and then in a mixed culture we may have equivalent contributions from Thiosphaera as well as Nitrosomonas, heterotrophic nitrification as well as autotrophic nitrification. And most interestingly, its aerobic denitrification rates were fair enough to take care of nitrate coming from both the roots. So I just applied my mathematics to this microbiology and designed a system. What could be the advantages? Now you don't need a separate step for heterotrophic oxidation of organics and autotrophic nitrification, because heterotrophic nitrifiers are available. So single sludge. And then you don't need any separate oxic and anoxic step, because it can aerobically denitrify. So what I did was, I started off my experiments on a rotating biological contactor and grew this Thiosphaera phytotropha, let it compete with other organisms in a mixed culture, and tried to exert selection pressures in favor of Thiosphaera by simply operating the reactor in such a way that I am able to get a very narrow range of DO, in which I was able to get aerobic denitrification rates which were fully capable of taking heterotrophic nitrification as well as autotrophic nitrification. Now, no external carbon source needed because you are not separating out the organics. Less buffer capacity because nitrification destroys alkalinity, denitrification produces alkalinity. No acclimation problem, it's all aerobic. And in a single sludge, I was able to remove carbon and nitrogen to the standards of European Union at not a single dollar extra. The literature said 70 to 90% extra cost is needed. I said no extra cost. The only thing is you have to run the reactor in a specific manner in order to derive the benefit of these new organisms. And a lot of work was carried out by us. And later on, I said, why should we go to nitrite, then nitrate, and come back to nitrite for denitrification part? So I worked on shortened pathway, which further reduced the cost by 21%. And used it for typical Rajasthan situation where you drive a well, find out high nitrates, you can't do much. Pump and treat method is very costly. So what people do is, in situ denitrification is achieved by driving a well, say this is the well to be corrected for nitrates. So we drive an injection well because directly you cannot put bacteria or carbon source into the drinking water well. So you drive an injection well, put all the organics and the microorganisms. They will permeate in this soil because you continuously drive water from here and put here. So there is a gradient towards this, right? So all the microbes will permeate in the soil, will carry out denitrification when the water is passing from here to here. Now the only risk involved is if some organic carbon goes here, it's dangerous for drinking water. You cannot have microbial contamination also, otherwise post-treatment will be very high. So we introduced Thiosphere in this model, and there were amazing results. We were able to denitrify at a very low cost, and we'll not go any further on this point. So that was the work with Thiosphere. Just probably one more slide, couple of more slides, on a new process called NMOX. In 1995, I received a paper from TU Delft, Netherlands, which is world number 1 in microbiology. Leslie Robertson sent me this paper saying that you've been commenting on our papers once they publish. I'm sending you a paper for your comments before we send it for PAMS microbiology publication. It's a very high-end journal. That is the honesty among, say, researchers. The paper was titled as, "We seem to have deciphered a missing link in nature." It was a breakthrough paper. It talked about oxidation of ammonia to nitrogen directly. Now imagine, ammonium is giving the electron and nitrate is accepting the electron. No heterotropy, absolutely. No carbon source, nothing. And you are getting rid of two pollutants simultaneously. So I made some thermodynamic calculations of reactive chemical fertilizer wastewater and wrote back in an hour's time that if this consortium of bacteria comes live and utilized in a reactor, I'll be able to reduce the cost of treatment from the present 1 crore per month to typically about 33 to 35 lakh rupees a month for reactive chemical fertilizers. But then I came back after doing my PhD, joined back my institute. I was already a teaching reader here, and I was sponsored for my PhD, and I did not find many facilities for microbiology to continue. And it's 20 years, still on NMOX, people are struggling with sewage and not with fertilizer industry waste or such waste where this would be the most optimal. So the thing is, the basics have to be applied at the right place, then and then only it will give you benefit. But it's an amazing process where ammonia is giving electron to nitride, converting it to nitrogen gas. It has many benefits from the point of energy as well as material balance. And in a detention time of just 6 hours, you can get rid of both the pollutants, which is absolutely amazing. Then there is a completely autotrophic nitrogen removal over nitrite called Canon. Another 2 minutes. So various steps are shown over here. How NMOX bacteria with others together are added, and the advantages of Canon system are very low aeration costs, and end product is nitrogen gas, which is absolutely pollution free. Just to conclude, nitrogen removal traditionally has been avoided because of limited funds, because of its prohibitive cost. But with the deciphering of new microorganisms having very interesting enzyme systems, the cost can be brought down substantially if you use them judiciously. So we have to understand the behavior of these microbes in mixed cultures and develop mechanisms for exerting selection pressures in favor of these in a mixed culture to derive the maximum benefit. So biotechnologies can change the world. Steve Jobs once said, the people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world, they do. And the next era is of biotechnology only. So I always prefer calling myself as a student of biological sciences rather than a professor of civil engineering. And I am thankful to the organizers for inviting me over. And I invite your questions or queries. Thank you.
Thank you. I take the privilege of being the chairman. the first question. What is the natural niche for the Thiospira?
Thiospira was isolated from a sulfur-containing waste from an anaerobic system they found in TU Delft. There was some experimental reactor, and it was an accidental discovery.
No, true. That is normally things happen that way. But people identified this organism under different ecological issues.
Actually, the current status of Thiospira pentotropha is it has been clubbed with Paracoccus denitrificans. So it comes from the same niche, as I said. And but it was just isolated from a sulfur oxidizing system. That was incidental. But now it has been reclassified under Paracoccus denitrificans with one specific CD3 variation in its enzymatic chain. But nevertheless, amazing organism. And I got the slants from TU Delft, so I didn't isolate it from anywhere else.
Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, young ones should always ask questions. You see, this is how I try to develop myself.
Yeah, so this NMOX reaction is kind of a link between aerobic and anaerobic reaction because nitrite is there and it's providing the oxygen, right?
No, it's anaerobic ammonia oxidation. It's an anaerobic reaction. But
but the oxygen is coming from nitrate.
Basically, ammonium is donating the electron and nitrate is accepting the electron. So you can say in a way, nitrate is giving you the oxygen required.
But not in an aerobic.
Not in an aerobic bulk environment. And that is the advantage because anaerobic systems are always low cost. And it's an amazing, again, consortium of bacteria. And I am trying to explain certain things about natural systems I forgot to tell you. I'm extending this work on natural systems and wetlands as well as soil biotechnology systems. I'm hoping that I'll be able to strike a lot of NMOX bacteria in the lower stretches. And that is why my indirect observation is deep natural systems, deep wetlands are removing nitrogen in a better way.
Yeah. That is my point. Basically, if you look at the various wetlands, probably you may find some association.
But I need your help for that. Thank you.
If there are no more questions, I would like to thank Professor A.B. Gupta for an excellent talk. Now we will have our second speaker for the session, Dr. C.S. Gahan. He is from Central University, Rajasthan, and he would be speaking.
Well, I started with Professor Gupta's talk, hearing him discussing about, he's a, I think, professor in civil engineering, a student in biotechnology. And same with me, I'm an assistant professor in microbiology and a student in metallurgical engineering. It's so a nice coincidence. He has been working with nitrates, which was also an ion. And I have been working with chloride and fluoride, which is also an ion. So our presentations would follow up. Before going to the chloride and fluoride issue, I would like to give an introduction to this field, how it should be. It comes from the biomining. Everyone is well known with mining. If you talk of mining, you know there is excavation, drilling, underground mining, and so many things. But when you talk of bio, one thing can come that as a human being, biological organism, if you mine, it can be biomining. But it's not that. It's invisible miners that we see on the streets. If you go to underground mining, you see people working there, right? But they are biominers, exactly. But they are invisible miners, which you can't see by naked eye. You need a microscope. There comes the microbiology to that aspect. They had these two aspects of talking. I was written on the slide is bioleaching and biooxidation. These are the two things which is commercially found today, last 20-30 years going around the world, not in India, for some reasons. But yeah, it's working out as commercial application. I'll show you. I'll come to that. But to give brief understanding about what is bioleaching, leaching is all of us know dissolution. So if a microorganism is utilized to leach some mineral of interest. For example, you are leaching nickel from nickel oxide or nickel sulfide ore, then only you are doing bio-leaching. Why I am telling this is a very bad misconception going around the world. I've seen in many places, bio-leaching of gold. No, never. It's bio-oxidation of gold, because you are oxidizing the mineral. Like say, gold is sitting inside the matrix of the arsenopyrite and pyrite. You are oxidizing that arsenopyrite and pyrite and liberating the mineral out for the leaching process to happen by cyanide or thiosulfate or thiourea. There are several other leachants. But microorganisms is never leaching. So if you hear somewhere bio-leaching of gold, please don't consider that it's a good article for sure. It can be misconception. So I have given a brief introduction. Today we have world's second largest copper production. All of you use copper. Second largest copper production is coming from deep leaching of copper by biotechnology. Because in Chile, if you go to Southern America, you have lot of chalcocite, CuS, C2S, covellite, chalcocite, these minerals, and they are a huge reservoir for copper. And the microorganism present from the acid mine drainage, that is coming, I'll come to that next slide. So they are doing its job round the year, slow process, but it gives us money, and we don't put anything. So we'll come to know how it happens. So this is the source of biomining microphone, where it came through. The acid mine drainage, because after mining, the pyrite is left out in the mines, and suddenly you find there is acid generated from that, and that is polluting the river water nearby. They are dissolving the minerals, heavy metals from the soil also. Then they just wanted to see, is there any microorganism or it's a chemical process? It's automatically happening. And the pH was something like 1. It's too low. So they found these sort of organisms. They isolated. There are mesophiles, moderate thermophiles, as well as thermophiles. So why we need extreme thermophiles? The question comes. Because in heat, oxidation of sulfide minerals is an exothermic reaction. The temperature goes to 80 or 90. So when the temperature is low, in the topmost heat, because heats are huge, the topmost is very cool. It's almost minus temperature. So there are these mesophiles, some psychophiles I didn't mention, they work. But once you come down, because that temperature is compensated by the heat generated by sulfur oxidation. And then you have, when the inside the core, when you have high temperature, these people take over. Come on, mesophiles, I won't shut down now, because temperature rise to 660. Moderate thermophiles come up. Yes, I will do the job. Then 80 degree above, the moderate thermophiles self, we are shutting down. Then the job is done by, but you need two organisms, iron as well as sulfur oxidation microorganisms. So how do they look like? Different biomicrobes. There is some acid thiobacillus peroxidans. You will find a lot of articles, thiobacillus peroxidans. Please ignore that. The name has changed by 2011. It hasn't changed. It's almost 6 years or 5 years. There's no thiobacillus. It's acid thiobacillus. And leptospirillum. These are why I gave these two examples, because these are the prominent microorganisms working today in all industries. So these are how they look like. I don't do much microbiology inside, so I don't want to go into microbiology part. I'm a process engineer. So we see commercial. We don't need to think that we are doing research in the laboratory. No, it's a full commercial application. You find Biox, Bactec, Minbac, Mintec, BH Billiton. There are so many companies. And there are 20-30 list of companies for gold as well as copper. And copper is mostly located in the countries like South America. And for gold, you'll find Australia. And you'll find South Africa, Mintec, Cape Town, they are working. Johannesburg also, there are people working. Working means industry is operating. It's not research. Research is going on, definitely. The pioneer research group was started by the group from University of Cape Town. The group they started. But still there is a huge center for that. And you see, as I'm talking that copper production, world's second largest copper production. If you see this slide, this one, you see, these heaps, they're covered, it's going on. And this much copper, you see copper solution coming, and they go over electrowinning. And electrowinning gives the 99% pure copper which you use in electricity, 99.9. So you get copper sulfate, just you need a electrolytic process to separate the copper. You see, it's going on, and tons of you're generating every day. And this one you can see, this is tank, this is a refractory gold concentrate operation. Then the question is, why did this copper was not done for this tank? The answer is, copper and gold prices are too different. You can't buy copper in a wedding ceremony. You can buy gold, right? So if copper was so that expensive, you could have old copper rings, right? So gold is expensive, so you can afford the stirred tank reactors. But as it's cheaper, copper is cheaper, you cannot afford. The process cost is too high for tank reactors. You cannot. So only gold and silver and platinum, these three metals, are operated on tank reactors. You have to look economics. You cannot just do science. Only my result is 99%. So what? You just say, thank you so much. We don't care what you are doing. So you get frustrated. So better do something which is realistic. And this is China. You won't imagine. I think 2001 or 2, China was doing, because previously, I'll just give a hint about gold. Previously in India today also we are doing grinding. There is a company called Hatti Gold Mines in Karnataka. They are doing grinding today also. And they do grinding, they liberate the gold, and they do for cyanide leaching. In China they are doing roasting. Roasting has two problems. One is they release arsenic gas, toxic gas to the environment, and sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide causes acid rain, all of us know, and arsenic gas, you know what it is. It's a toxic. So to avoid that, China shut down almost 20-30 roasting plants and started this. You can see this view. They started all bioreactors. They invited Bactech and Mintech, and finally Becox got the tender to do that, and they start their full operation now in China. So, and China has a huge bioprocess engineering, biohydrometallurgical research group. They are leading now almost. So the point of saying is that if you take a leap, you will definitely succeed if you have proper people coming in, like Mintech, Bactech, or Becox, or Biox, or you can say Minbac, there's Mintech and Bactech, they combined. There are so many companies, they're coming up. So if you take help of them, they will definitely, you will win. And now this is the bigger question, money. Money is the biggest question always. You can see this picture. Whenever the gold price went down, then biologists were invited. So nice. We biotechnologists or microbiologists are there when only the price goes down. Because they want cheaper technology. You see, again, here, whenever the price went down, this is normally for copper. And this is for gold. Whenever the price, this is copper, this is gold. So whenever the price went down, then biotechnology, all the discoveries, all the new companies came up. Only when they got money, because industry to put money in they trust the scientists to work. So whatever discoveries happened, whenever the price went down, because they can't afford the cost, then let's see if bio works. And something came out and there was success. So all the companies today, and the problem is this is, you cannot have these companies for years and years, because if the mining is finished, if the ore is finished, the desired ore is finished, the mine has to be closed. There are so many bio companies which work for 10 years, then they shut down because they don't have ores for that. So that is another issue. That is why we don't have. You can have medicine company continue going for years and years, but you cannot have a mining company going for years and years, for ages. No, it's difficult unless you have this. Because if you carry ore from Australia to Sweden, the process cost, the transport cost is 100 times more than what you produce. So you will never buy ores from south to up north. So there are issues. And just to give why you saw this acid mine drainage happens, and what is the process, how this came up. This ferric iron, that's the pyrite, and they oxidize this mineral, they liberate, the ferric iron get reduced to ferrous, and this ferrous becomes the food for the iron oxide microorganism, and they soon oxidizes that to the ferric again. But if you take chemical, only pure chemical instead of biological, then ferrous is left as it is. So once you have certain amount of inoculum, for example 10% of inoculum, then you are free. It will go on, it will go on. That will get to ferrous, and again ferric, again ferrous, it will go on until the complete pyrite is oxidized. It will not leave the place. It will only leave the place when the reaction will stop, when it is completely no pyrite is left out. And then again this pyrite mineral is a thiosulfate. There is two mechanisms, thiosulfate and polysulfate mechanism. Though disulfides like pyrite, tungstenite and molybdenite, MOS2, WS2 has to go through the thiosulfate pathway, and the rest all minerals go through the polysulfate pathway. That means instead of thiosulfate, you will get, if you zinc sulfide, nickel sulfide, if you other copper sulfide, you will get elemental sulfate as a first primary product. And that is also fine for the sulfur oxide microorganism to oxidize, because this is done by iron oxide, but then thiosulfate can be oxidized by the sulfur oxidation microorganism, and you get sulfate, and you get protons. And this iron oxidation process is a proton consuming process. That means acid is consumed, and that acid is compensated by the sulfur oxidation. So they are helping each other. There is one organism, acid ferroxidants, which can do iron oxidation as well as sulfur oxidation. So they help each other. At one patch of time they require protons, at one patch of time they release protons. But if you have two different organisms like Leptospirillum fyrifilum and Acetylus caldus, you will definitely compensate each other. So, and the total reaction is acidic. The pyrite oxide, why you get acid mine drainage? Because pyrite oxidation, and this is some more reactions as I discussed already. I don't need to discuss more. I'll come to this is all a background, and now I'll come to the problem, chloride and fluoride. This chloride and fluoride, I remember when I was doing a PhD, this is part of, not part, but some after my PhD work, suddenly I was working with reclamation of utilization of steel slags for biotechnology, biotechnology company, because of neutralization cost. What is neutralization then? The problem is, when you have a tank reactor, when you are having arsenopyrite or pyrite for gold by oxidation, the pH goes down, and you need lime to control the pH, because they are acidophilic, they are acid lovers, they love to be in acid. Without acid they can't grow. So the cost of lime was expensive, because there are 3 stages of lime additions. But when you are adding neutralizing agents, then if you have a steel slag, which is a waste product, you are saving 3 things. Virgin limestone deposit, you are saving what? You are saving the process cost, transportation cost of the limestone, and also you are saving the landfill cost of steel slags. If it works, if it doesn't toxify the bacterial growth in the system, and it did. So, but then with one ashes I was working, I found some toxic effect of chlorides there, and suddenly I calculated toxic effect, went on to study. And when we designed the work, suddenly I see a newspaper article from Australia. Australian biohydromet researchers are finding out chloride toxicity studies which can give more money and bring more money to gold companies. And I had a chance to meet those people, Helen Watling from Curtin University. So we met and we discussed. And they were starting which we already worked on. And then we realized every stress in heterotrophic organism, they found that it is going to increase the maintenance. Then what is maintenance? Maintenance is, we always have all of us know, when we make a growth plot, when teachers teach us micro growth, we tell that this much glucose, this much population. That means 100% is replication. But it's not. There is some energy which we also use. We use for our maintenance, makeup, hair dry, or a lot of things we have. Perfumes. But we don't use all our energy for our working. So maintenance is a non-replicative energy. For bacteria, there is a non-replicative energy which is required to be understood. And when you have stress, in heterotrophy, it has been seen that when you have stress condition, this maintenance energy increases. But unfortunately, in this chloride, when we studied on this chemostat, we found it's decreasing for chlorides. And first we didn't test the result, we found explanation for that. So I will discuss. And that was important because in Australia, why we went to Australians work on chloride? Because the mining regions, if you see the coastal zones, you will find there is no industry. All the industry is desert region in the middle of the country. So they have the processed water which is coming on, that is huge chloride, huge chloride. They need to find out the microorganism. They want to understand the mechanism where they can work in the chloride water. So that is the understanding why they want to study our chlorides. So, and fluorides. As I told, I was working with steel slag. There was a slag called BOF slag which had a lot of fluoride. And I was there in Argentina for a conference with the father of biohydrometallurgy, James Brearley. There are strains on Brearley also. His wife and they were the pioneer of the. They came to me twice. How do you think you can get rid of fluoride? You have fluoride in your slag, but you don't have any problem with the biological organism there. I told him it's aluminium which is making complex with fluoride and it's not doing the job. So my slag had aluminium. That is the reason I got rid of. Otherwise, I would be in trouble also. So told, if I knew that, I would not be bankrupt today. He was bankrupt. I'll tell you the story. The reason was people trusted him. One mining company, I think it was zinc, and the area they sampled that had less fluoride. But once the mining process started, the plant was commissioned, everything was going on, and suddenly all the ores they got, they were fluoride. They didn't knew that. And that fluoride were killing the pathogens, killing the bioprocess, and it didn't work at all. There was no recovery. And the company has to shut down, and he was in really bankrupt issue. So he told, had I knew those things at that time, I would have solved, because they didn't think about fluoride at all. So all this study for me, fluoride and chloride, the motivation factors are these two things. So the background. All of you are, if you are a bioprocess engineer, you start with monod endpoint equation. The monod equation says mu is equal to mu max S Ks. Mu max is maximum specific growth rate, mu is specific growth rate, S is substrate, and K is the substrate coefficient. This is the basic equation on which we developed. And to work on this, and the point equation is 1 by Y observed by 1 by Y true, MS, that is maintenance energy. You can calculate maintenance energy, and you can also see the true yield. True yield is, for example, you have a chemical, you are giving chemical composition of some certain feed material, you know stoichiometry how much you are going to get yield. But in reality, you don't get that. You get something different. That is called observed yield. And you get, if you know these things, you can calculate the maintenance energy. So this is the basics on two basic equations on which our all studies were dependent. For that, you need 4 parameters like biomass, substrate concentration, residual and feed substrate concentration, and the retention time. Retention time is 1 by dilution rate. Dilution rate is the flow rate by volume. If you have reactor volume, you know the volume of the reactor 1 liter, you know the flow rate what is in, F by V calculate dilution rate, reciprocal of dilution rate is retention time. You calculate it and you can get substrate concentration, you calculate substrate concentration, you are giving ferrous sulfate, you know how much ferrous you added, and you calculate the ferrous estimate in the reactor. When it's a steady state condition, you know what is the residual substrate concentration. And that you need to have in steady state condition only. And steady state conditions, we believe it is 5 to 3 times the retention time. If you go, you can get a steady state condition, that's fine. And chemostat, as all of you know, well mixed, if you are working from biotechnology, you must be very well aware of this. Well mixed reactor, no accumulation biomass. This is a huge problem again. I remember I was working for 6 months and suddenly I find results as per the monod curve. You need biomass has to increase with the increased retention time, dilution rate. But suddenly we find decrease. I find lot of papers, Boone et al. And so many people from South Africa group also, they have no plot goes down. The reason was different. Reason they didn't know the reason. They just thought it's okay, it's fine. The reason was these organisms have a high attaching capacity. Everyone is in the wall. When you are estimating the biomass from the solution, you don't see the biomass there in that solution. But they are doing the job of oxidation. They are increasing the rate of oxidation, but the Vmax is high, but still the biomass is low. Then I started to, after 6 months, I threw all the results and I started to clean the reactor every day. I find it's fitting in the plot. That means if you don't allow to attach on the walls, then you will never have problem with that monod, whatever they suggest. You cannot defy the rules. So, and you should see that you don't precipitate iron. How would you precipitate iron? Because as I told you, iron oxidation is a proton consuming process. So, protons are consumed means pH should sharp. If you don't add acid at 2.5 pH, above 2.5 pH, you will start precipitating iron almost. As per the ES-pH diagram. You will precipitate iron because of that redox. And you need to have limiting, culture substrate limiting growth, no limiting growth. You should not put any negative factors also. And axenic culture is not important. Axenic means pure culture is not important in this study. Reason, this is just a reactor how we operate it. These are feeding in and pumping out. But the point is, if you are having, you should not worry for axenic culture because these are autotrophs. Autotrophs means they are using inorganic carbon and they are working at pH 115 where no one grows. They are the safe side. You don't need to have a sterilized condition. You don't need to have a autoclave the media. Just carefree. Don't worry. Just leave them because they need air every time. Air and carbon dioxide. It will go very nicely. But if you don't give them air and carbon dioxide, you will stress them. So when you're working bioreactor, you need to feed carbon dioxide extra because the growth rate increases too much high. So these are some basic model plots from 18 and 19. If you